Okay, I am back again for yet another podcast. That's like 3 in a week. So basically, I'm gonna not make another one for 6 months. No, I'm just kidding. I'm trying to be a little more productive when it comes to this podcast because apparently people like it. I don't know why people like it so much, but when I bring it back, people are very excited. When I leave, I get hate mail. So today we, first of all, is there any business from the last podcast or the previous podcast? And the answer is no. I haven't received any messages on corrections or questions that people want me to answer, which is totally cool. And also there was an issue which you may now realize if you're a listener at Spotify, and that's that when I uploaded the podcast, the last 2, they did not appear at Spotify. And then I found out from the people at my podcast host that I have to put it in as an MP3. It's a bunch of technical stuff, but nonetheless, going forward, you should be able to listen to this on Spotify. And that's a good thing because I looked at my numbers for the number of views and downloads, people listening, and they're significantly higher when Spotify is involved. So today we are going to talk about an interesting phenomenon in forensics that we all have to deal with when we're in this field, and that is accidents that appear to be homicides on first inspection. Now, this sort of thing is really important if you are a death investigator, if you are someone who has not been in the field and maybe you're thinking about going in the field. You will be interested to hear about these cases that I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about 3 of them. It's from a research paper, which I will talk about the citation and everything in just a moment. But these kind of cases can be tricky for new investigators, and these kind of things are very much the source of conspiracies, online quote unquote experts who look at whatever information they have and they conclude that it must be a murder because there's no way it couldn't be. And that's when you know somebody doesn't work in this field very much, because we see stuff that you would not believe. And then you would think, okay, well, 100% this is a murder. And then you look at all the data and you realize, actually, no, it's not. And sometimes you even see stuff caught on tape on cases that people thought were murder, and it turns out they weren't murder. So this podcast is based on a research paper from the Journal of Forensic Sciences. This was actually published in 2016, but it is instructive for 20 years before that or 40 years after that, because there are so many different permutations of these kind of cases, and you have to be prepared as an investigator and as a forensic pathologist to be able to see a really unusual death scene and put it together. So this is from, this one's called Accidental Trauma Mimicking Homicidal Violence. And this, the author on this is Prallo, Samuel Prallo, and I actually know, and the other author here is Alexander Arendt, Thomas Cameron, and Joseph Prallo. I met Dr. Prallo, Joseph Prallo, at a National Association of Medical Examiners meeting. He's a very well-known pathologist, a forensic pathologist who I believe works in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I met him briefly, talked to him, seems like a really nice guy. And there's a little bit of an overlap in cases that are from northern Indiana, where some of the cases will go up into Michigan for him to do them, and other cases will be done by pathologists in northern Indiana, such as in Fort Wayne or over by Gary, Indiana, which is sort of by Chicago. So this paper is specifically about just a few examples of cases where the scene looked like a murder, but it turns out it wasn't a murder. So I'm going to actually just read the text, and you can kind of picture in your mind, and then I'll give commentary. Case 1, the police responded to a call in which an unknown male was found bleeding and unresponsive, lying in a bathtub that contained a pool of blood. He was pronounced dead at the scene, and extensive hemorrhage appeared to be arising from his axilla/chest, so armpit, where there was a large traumatic defect. A blood-covered, broken ceramic pedestal sink stand was adjacent to the bathtub. Police considered the case a probable homicide, and the case was referred. Autopsy revealed a deep, sharp force injury of the axilla with transection, meaning it cut, the right axillary artery and right axillary vein. Toxicology revealed acute ethanol intoxication with a postmortem blood ethanol concentration of 313 milligrams per deciliter, which is a lot. Other findings at autopsy included mild atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease of the coronary arteries and aorta. Subsequent investigation, including interviews with multiple family members and friends, revealed that the pedestal had been broken for many weeks and that the 31-year-old decedent was known to drink heavily. Based on these findings, it was determined that the intoxicated man apparently fell into the already broken pedestal stand, causing severe injury. The cause of death was sharp force injuries of the right upper extremity, with a contributing factor of acute ethanol intoxication, and the manner of death was accident. So in that case, you have to imagine the death investigator comes into the scene, police come into the scene, and they see this blood everywhere. And they see the broken pedestal stand. What are you going to think? You're going to think there was a struggle. The ceramic sink broke, and the person may have used part of that sink to injure the person, and then they bled to death in the bathtub. So, in fact, what happened was this person was heavily intoxicated, slipped or tripped and fell with that sharp ceramic pedestal stabbing into the armpit and then cutting an artery. Now, once you cut an artery, and the axillary artery is not an enormous artery like the, some of the great arteries that come off the aortic arch, but it's a pretty big artery, maybe the diameter of a pencil or maybe a little less than that. But the point is, you're going to lose a lot of blood fast. And if you consider the altered consciousness state of somebody who's heavily intoxicated, he may have been injured and just rolled himself into the bathtub, and then every second that goes by, that blood is pouring out and his consciousness is getting worse. So this is a case that without the history that the pedestal stand had been broken, it probably would have been more worrisome. But other indications in this situation would be, is he a known chronic alcoholic? Because they frequently have a lot of accidents in the home, falling downstairs, falling through glass coffee tables, and that sort of thing. That helps. Also, was there a struggle anywhere else, signs of a struggle anywhere else in the home? Was the door locked or unlocked? Did it look like that had been broken into? Did the person have any known enemies? That sort of thing. So when you put it all together, it's pretty obvious what happened. That case isn't necessarily earth-shattering, but you have to picture it from the perspective of the police and the investigator who comes in, and then the pathologist has to rely, fairly heavily on this ancillary information. I mean, the pathologist isn't going to go to the scene all that often. I mean, that's more of a TV thing, and I know that there will be people listening who they work in offices where the forensic pathologist is on call and goes to the scene. And that's true. That probably does happen in some areas, but you have to consider that a place like many of the places in the Midwest, it's usually one office that covers dozens of counties. And so the pathologist can't go to every death scene because they would literally just drive all night to death scenes. So now let's move on to case 2 really quickly. The police responded to a call in which a 49-year-old male worker was found unresponsive lying face up at workplace, which is a recycling center, with apparent head injuries. Emergency medical services were called to the scene, where he was pronounced dead. 2 distinct lacerations were evident on the left side of the scalp, and the initial police impression was that the case represented a probable homicide due to blunt force injuries. The case was referred to the pathologist. Autopsy revealed severe craniocerebral trauma with lacerations of the left forehead and upper scalp, extensive underlying skull fractures, subdural hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and brain contusions, thus confirming the initial police suspicion of lethal head injuries. So the term, by the way, craniocerebral, literally means that your skull is injured and also the brain is injured. Autopsy also reveals hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and pulmonary emphysema. Toxicology was positive for salicylate, so like aspirin, nicotine, and cotinine. And cotinine is a metabolite of nicotine. So if you smoke a cigarette, you will have nicotine in your system, but you will also have cotinine. All right. Subsequent investigation revealed that the man, who had been working alone at the center, as was his custom, had been using a crane-operated heavy weight to break apart metal scrap for recycling. The process involved using the crane to hoist the weight via cable and then dropping it onto the scrap metal in order to break it into smaller pieces. According to coworkers, he had repeatedly been reprimanded for not staying in the designated protective work booth during this activity. His body was found outside the booth. Closer inspection of the scene revealed a relatively large fragment of metal near where his body had been discovered. In addition, the remote control device for the crane had been found in his right hand, indicating that he had likely been operating the equipment, as the crane was not in a normal storage position. The decedent had last been seen operating the equipment by coworkers an hour before his body was discovered. So based on these findings, it was determined that the man died as the result of an industrial accident. When a piece of shrapnel struck him in the head, the cause of death was craniocerebral trauma. The manner of death was accident. The cause of death, on that one, you could also just say blunt force injuries of the head. That would be perfectly fine. It would be equivalent to what was stated here. And so once again, we have a situation where known behavior of the decedent played a role in determining cause of death. Let's remove that. If you don't have that information, that he behaved recklessly at work, that he frequently used a crane-operated device to break apart scrap, that he was frequently outside of the booth when he did this, this might have been a little bit more of a difficult case. Certainly finding the metal shrapnel nearby still implies that he was using this crane device, but someone could also say, well, couldn't the shrapnel have been used to hit him in the head? Somebody hit him in the head or something. Well, of course, in this case, we don't know the size of this shrapnel, but we also have to understand that significant force was generated, perhaps more force generated by the smashing of an object and it flying away from it than would be from somebody swinging it. So, again, you have to, the point we're getting at here and we're coming back to is when you come into a scene and you see a lot of blood and you see a lot of trauma, don't automatically jump to homicide. Just be descriptive. Take pictures. Obviously, interview every witness you can. In a case like this, very often these days, now remember, this is 2016, so we didn't have as much constant filming in every single area of every single business. These days, you would probably have a camera in this area observing the workers and would have been able to ask for security tape and would have seen the accident occur. Either way, it doesn't matter in this case. This is an OSHA nightmare. And that's, I think I may have done a podcast at one point on workplace accidents. It's a very big deal when somebody dies in the workplace because you have OSHA involved, you have life insurance involved, You have possible litigation, civil litigation, and possibly even criminal litigation if there is some major oversights occurring at the workplace. Very often what we have to do as forensic pathologists is we do these autopsies of workplace deaths to really determine, was the workplace at fault for the death? Were the conditions of work at fault for the death, or was it a natural disorder? I would say for me, in my career, and I have done countless workplace deaths, more often than not, it is actually the worker themselves just has a medical condition, like a heart attack, ruptured aorta, something like that, brain aneurysm, and then also, not uncommonly, and certainly much more commonly these days, are individuals who die at work as a result of drug use. That is quite a common thing. Now I'm going to take a drink of water here. All right, so hopefully that silence wasn't too disturbing. I remember when I was in high school, I took a TV and radio production class, and I remember we talked to the guy at the radio station, and he acted like any silence, any significant silence would be considered dead air and is the most horrific sin against all of humanity if you were to have any sort of like dead air silence. So I'm sort of, I have PTSD from that incident, but I try not to be silent for too long on these podcasts because it is kind of annoying. Okay, now we're going to do case number 3. An elderly man living in a retirement home was found dead next to his bed, with his head resting against a blood-soaked mattress. His scalp had a large laceration, and there was extensive blood spatter on the walls and elsewhere at the scene. There were also items of overturned and broken furniture. The initial scene findings suggested a possible homicidal attack. The coroner's office investigated and was referred to the pathologist. A limited postmortem external examination, as ordered by the coroner, revealed a scalp laceration with underlying arterial injury, but no palpable skull or facial fractures. The remainder of the examination was non-contributory. Following the subsequent investigation as described below, the coroner decided not to order any toxicology. Further investigation revealed that the man had a long history of drinking heavily by himself. There was no evidence that anyone had visited him. There was evidence of recent ethanol use in the room, and there was an odor of ethanol associated with the decedent. He had likely fallen into a lamp, striking his head on a metal portion of the lamp, thus explaining the head wound. Following the injury, which was obviously not immediately incapacitating, he apparently moved about the room while hemorrhaging from his wound. Based on these findings, the cause of death was exsanguination due to a chop-type injury to the head related to a fall, with underlying probable acute ethanol intoxication as contributory cause. The manner of death was an accident. Okay, so again, this is one that's maybe a little more tricky because of the scene. There's blood spatter everywhere on the walls and on the furniture and everything, indicating that the decedent was moving before death, moving around. And when you consider knocked over furniture and lamps and things like that, this is going to look much more like an attack. This is going to look much more like a struggle to an unseasoned investigator. However, a key with this case is that this guy was at a retirement home, and again, these are not my cases, but I'm just telling you from similar cases I had, these retirement homes, these are sort of group living type communities. When people come in or come out sometime in terms of visitors or assailants, I guess in this case you're trying to rule out. So in this case, you're going to look at visitor logs, you're going to look at any camera footage that might be there, and more importantly, anybody who is in an adjacent room, adjacent down the hall, anything like that. And if you can rule out that this person had anyone in the room with them, including from a window to the outside, then you know it occurred in the room. Now, if you remember from my Bob Saget podcast, and there are still people who insist that he was murdered for whatever reason a person would murder Bob Saget, but he was checked into a hotel where there was a camera on the door the entire time, and there was no one who left the room or entered the room during the time frame when he died, and also his key card was only used once by him to get in the room. So it's a similar sort of thing here. You can rule that the person had no one in there with them, and therefore the death must have been caused by something they did. Certainly alcohol in this case is contributory, because like the first case, consciousness is going to be altered. So once you fall and hit your head and you've already got a very high blood alcohol, you're going to keep falling around. It's probably, if the floors are hard, and that's something you have to consider, if the floors are hardwood or some kind of linoleum or something, the blood is going to make it slicker, which then causes a person who's already altered biochemically, neurochemically, to keep falling, which makes everything much worse. And so again, the scalp and the face has a very rich blood supply. If you cut yourself, you will just bleed and bleed and bleed. So in this case, it sounds like he cut a little scalp artery, and that thing is just going to bleed, even though it's not a very big artery. Now, when we talk about scalp arteries, I mean, the biggest one I can think of would be the temporal artery. And the temporal artery is usually, let me think of the example using the pencil. If you think of a regulation number 2 pencil, it's literally probably an eighth of the width of a number 2 pencil. So it's really small. Obviously, that varies depending on the size of the person. But if you do not stop the bleeding, you will simply bleed out. And some of the most confusing cases we can have as forensic pathologists are individuals who have cut arteries and then they bleed to death, because not all arteries are superficial like the ones on the head. But every now and then we'll get an injury to the leg or something, and the person will bleed out because they didn't seek care. Usually they don't seek care because they are severely inebriated. So we always have to consider, and you can see in this case, 2 of the 3 cases, alcohol was involved, and my experience has been about the same. When you have cases like this that look like murder scenes, alcohol is very often involved acutely. But also, and if you watched my TikTok series on gastrointestinal bleeding as a result of alcohol use, esophageal varices is a scene exam that causes everyone to think it's a murder because of the amount of blood. And if you go watch that video, you can see hundreds, or I don't know, there might even be thousands of comments on there where people who have worked in healthcare talk about esophageal varices and about how awful those cases are. And I remember early in my career, I had some esophageal varices cases where the investigator basically said, yep, this is a murder, 100%. Go ahead, you're going to be, testifying in court soon. And then after you look at the whole case, you're like, no, actually, this was a natural death. The person had really bad esophageal varices. They have hepatic cirrhosis. They are a drinker. They have, chronic hepatitis C or something like that, where they have the liver failure, which then also impairs the coagulation of the blood. So you kind of get a double hit there. These cases are, these can be tricky for people who have not done death investigations. Sometimes they can be tricky for seasoned investigators. You just always have to keep it in your mind that no matter how horrible a scene looks, think that could this be a natural death? Could this be a accidental death? Could it be a suicide? You can't always jump to homicide, but of course, at the same time, as pathologists, we can't miss homicides. Police, coroners, pathologists, death investigators. Homicide is the one thing we can't miss. And so there's a conclusion to this paper, and I'm going to say the paper's name again, just in case you wanted to look it up and read it yourself. From the Journal of Forensic Sciences, it's called Accidental Trauma Mimicking Homicidal Violence. It's from 2016 September. And the first author is Samuel Prahlow, Prahlow, okay? The conclusion, I love this, and I'm going to read it to you because it's so pertinent. Recently, the world of forensic within the world of forensic science, the idea of reducing cognitive bias by eliminating scientists' knowledge of contextual details surrounding a case to keep the investigation from being hindered by preconceived notions of the investigator has been heralded as a good and necessary change. Such a goal is laudable in many forensic science disciplines. However, in the case of forensic pathology, eliminating all so-called cognitive bias in such a fashion is contrary to the practice of good medicine. Without full knowledge of many of the details surrounding a case, a forensic pathologist cannot complete his or her job to the best of his or her ability. To do anything less would be a disservice to the forensic pathology profession, to law enforcement, to the criminal justice system, to the decedent and surviving family members, and to the general public. Okay, and then they kind of, in the conclusion, there's one more sentence I want to read. There's more to it if you want to read it, but the practice of forensic pathology is the practice of medicine. The discipline cannot and should not be practiced in a vacuum or in a black box. And really, all of medicine has to be practiced in context with other variables. You don't just see a potassium number and treat that potassium number without looking at the patient, without considering their medications, without considering their underlying medical conditions or other lab data. And it's the same with forensics, but why are we held to a little bit of a different standard? One is that a lot of people in the public think that autopsy is magic, meaning that the moment we open the body and we look at the body, we can identify a cause and manner of death without considering anything else. And of course, that's just not true. But the second thing is that forensic cases are entrenched with law enforcement. So, there's this belief that all pathologists and all law enforcement somehow is corrupt and convenes together to alter causes and manners of death based on some nebulous force that seems to change no matter what the case is. Has something in the past happened that is along those lines? I'm sure it has, because humans are unfortunately can be corrupt. But if you just watch and listen to the fallout of any celebrity death, you'll find that most people just believe that it's a conspiracy, and that we should be able to identify cause and manner from the body with no input from police or investigators. And again, I'm mainly speaking to the people who are interested in going into this field. This is something you have to consider. All right, I think I have my point across on this, and I just want to say or remind you that I have other social media. So the Dead Letter at TikTok, the Dead Letter that's at Instagram, and the new thing I have now is Substack, which is more of like a blog. It's a little more academic. It's sort of like a little bit like a blog crossed with Twitter, except without all of the absolutely bonkers people that you find on Twitter. And basically, there's a paid side to that, and there is a free side to that. So the paid side is where I'm putting a lot of my opinions on cases that are in the news, and also a lot of the gross pathology that I'm showing that seems to get me banned in other places. That is a place where I think it's like $5 a month or something. But it could be considered that since I don't actually earn any money on this podcast at all, I'm sitting at $0 after 4 years. Supporting that Substack page could be in some ways a proxy for supporting this podcast. And the bonus is you actually get to learn something new along the way, and you get to actually see pathology, because I'm posting a lot of my photos from files that I have, and also textbooks and things like that. So with that being said, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and hopefully we'll do it again next week.